Recording in progress.
Hello, so this is the second part. I'm going to record the lecture, I think, in three parts. Sorry, I had to stop it because I was using the wrong video. So now I'm going to share my screen and show you the talk that I want to share with you. And it is artist Cara Springer, who is discussing artistic work and politics in Texas in the United States of America. And after that, I will specifically discuss this installation by Cara Springer called Anna and Andre. And I've written about it in the most recent book that I published. I've published three books. The first book was about gang rape and murder of a woman named Jyoti Singh in New Delhi, India. And it was also about the decriminalization of queer rights, which happened on September 6th, 2018 in India. The second book I've published is about artists, and it is about political artists. And there is a chapter about Cara Springer's installation, Anna and Andre, which is also on the cover of the book. And the third book I have published will be published in 2026, and it is about gender and social movements in urban India, and it's specifically about urbanization and the relationship between urbanization in India and gender and sexual politics, including feminist politics and queer politics. And I was a visiting fellow at Birkbeck College in London, England, and I worked as part of a project called Hira Single, which is about communities of unmarried women in Shanghai and Delhi. And they are not formally or religiously married. And so I have written this book about urbanization and gender following this research that I have done about the relationship between cities and gender uh, throughout one's life course. Okay, so I will share the screen.
Behind every Olympic organic yogurt is a happy grass-fed cow. Olympic Organic, where a little care makes a lot of good.
When your back hurts, life hurts. Take back your back with Roback's Dual Action Formula.
Hello, everyone. My name is Max Fields. I'm the Associate Curator at PhotoFest, and I'm thrilled to have you here today for this program. Today's conversation with artist Cara Springer is
Stop the video because I think it's distracting too.
presented in conjunction with a new program series called Texas Talks Art, an unprecedented multi-institutional initiative intended to introduce the work of artists across the state of Texas to a wider audience. Taking the form of virtual 30-minute lunchtime talks, the series features 50 Texas artists and art collectives in conversation with 50 Texas curators beginning in January of 2021. The talks are all free and they all take place every Tuesday at noon. We want to thank everyone at Texas Talks Art for inviting us to participate and their wonderful program. It's truly an honor to be in such good company with so many amazing artists and curators working around the state. Today's talk will focus on the work of artist Cara Springer, who is currently working and living in Houston, where she is an artist in resident at the prestigious core program at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. In her work, Springer examines the nature of armatures, the underlying structures that hold the flesh of a body in place. She works with photography, sculpture, and site-specific interventions to explore systems of structural support through engagement with architecture, urban infrastructure, and systems of institutional and political power. She holds degrees from the University of Toronto, ENSCI Les Ateliers in Paris, and the Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia. Her work has been exhibited at the Philadelphia Institute of Contemporary Art, the National Gallery of the Bahamas, the National Gallery of Jamaica, in the Frankfurt Museum of Applied Arts. She's an alumni of the Independent Study Program at the Whitney Museum of American Art, and currently holds a fellowship, as I mentioned before, with the Museum of Fine Arts Houston Core Program. We're thrilled to be speaking with Kara today ahead of her inclusion in PhotoFest's upcoming exhibition, Public Life, Recording the Blur, wherein Springer will be presenting an interpretation of her latest body of work, Oil, as a large-scale photo mural on PhotoFest's headquarters facade. Before we begin the conversation, we want to acknowledge PhotoFest partners and sponsors who make our programming and exhibitions possible. This includes the Brown Foundation, the Houston Endowment, National Endowment for the Arts, the Texas Commission on the Arts, City of Houston through the Houston Arts Alliance, the Philip and Edith Leonian Foundation, the Powell Foundation, the Wortham Foundation, the WWW Foundation, the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation, Judith and Gamble Baldwin, Wendy Watrous and Frederick Baldwin, Katie and Michael A. Casey, Martha and David Moore, Nina and Michael Zilka, the PhotoFest Board of Directors, Silver Street Studios, Island Cloud Services, and generous donors to the PhotoFest Annual Fund. Without this support, we wouldn't be able to do half of the things, any of the things that we do today. So now that the formal housekeeping is out of the way, and perhaps, Kara, you can join us on video and we can go ahead and start our conversation.
I'm muted. Hi, Max. How you doing?
Hi, Kara. It's good to see you. Thank you again so much for joining us. I'm so thrilled that we're able to talk today. And just for the audience to know, Kara and I have been talking about this program for several months now, and it's just been such an incredible opportunity for me to get to know Kara and to get to know your work. And yeah, so maybe we can go ahead and dive in.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you so much for the invitation to be here with
you. So I know about you, but perhaps you could introduce yourself to the audience as if they're completely unaware of you and your practice. And maybe a place to start is to ask, what are the central questions that drive your art making and research? And what are your primary mediums? And how did you arrive at this methodology?
Sure. So, I mean, in terms of my practice, I'm always asking this question around armature structural support systems. And in a really basic way, I think that that's the question of how do you make a structure stand? And in turn, what are the terms under which something comes apart? And so more and more, I'm understanding that in relationship to care and tending to, and kind of thinking about that in terms of the way in which one must be so attuned to like the context and environment in order to know how a structure might live in relationship to the world around it, how it might actually be sustainable. And so, as you mentioned in your intro, I work with photography, sculpture, site-specific installation, and yeah, it's worth sharing maybe that I trained as an industrial designer. And that very much, so I trained and I also practiced for many years as an industrial designer before kind of making that shift. And it still exists in my life in whatever way. But yeah, I mean, I would say that that certainly informs the materials that I work with, how I come to form. But I think also for me, conceptually, like industrial design gets most interesting and exciting for me in the moments in which it holds the potential for intervening in systems. Yeah, and so for me, there's certainly a connectedness between that training and practice and what I'm doing now in the world.
Brilliant. And perhaps we can get more specific with some images and we can talk a little bit about your earlier work. So I'm going to pull up this image right now because I'm really excited to talk about this work. Can you tell us about your I would say your earlier work, work made before Houston, and perhaps starting with this, and then we can move forward with your other
Sure,
project.
absolutely. So this is a project that ended up being titled The Earth and All Its Inhabitants. So the image that we're looking at is this installation that I did in NASA some years ago in NASA, the Bahamas. And it, in this basic way, it's this ladder that is falling slowly enough that I was able to capture this image. And I took the image while visiting my partner's family over the holidays and kind of sat with it for probably a couple of years on my studio wall, thinking about it. It felt in many ways kind of too beautiful to deal with. Like I wasn't sure if I could do anything with it. And at some point, I was commissioned by Small X Journal for a show that they were doing, a group show called The Visual Life of Social Affliction. And in any case, I ended up developing this into, maybe we can go to the next slide. So into this double-sided light box. And so this is really like a commercial sign that I have produced. And so on either side, there's the image and its mirror. And so for me, it kind of became this portal, and something that was important about it is the fact that it's mobile, so it's battery powered. The idea for me, it was going to be showing in some different places, and the idea for me was that I would show up and build some kind of cart that would allow me myself to move this thing around, and that was really important. And as it turned out, it also was something that was really frustrating and kind of a nuisance for the spaces that it ended up, like when it was in, for example, the National Gallery of the Bahamas, there just wasn't the human power to deal with swapping out these batteries.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually there were rolling outages, there was a hurricane. So mostly it sat dark in that space. And really, like, I realized that the project became about that and about this kind of ask to tend to this thing and the circumstances in which it was possible to do so, and also when it wasn't.
Yeah, and I think what we'll get to by looking at other examples of your work is this relationship to site and it's like almost it's site responsive or place responsive in a lot of ways. Can you talk about the process in relation to this project a bit? Like tell us a little bit about like I mean you mentioned that it was a bit difficult to sort of dream of an image, but can you talk about not just like how you made the work there, but also how you think about the work as it changes locations, like how presenting this work in Houston, for example, would react or would change the work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was something really nice for me about the fact that the first place that this showed was in Nassau, the Bahamas, where the original image was created. And there's certainly a different meaning. So this is actually a digital sketch using an image that I took in Exuma, which is a more rural island in the Bahamas. And like in this context, the idea was that it would actually be kind of like not very far away from the site itself. Um, and there was something for me in the kind of surprise of stumbling upon this in that context. Certainly, I mean, the places that it showed, it moved to Little Haiti, sorry, the Little Haiti Cultural Center in Miami. And again, like that was really interesting. I hadn't experienced that place before, and it was really interesting to go there and experience this place that in so many ways felt like the Caribbean that was actually in the United States. Like there was this strangeness of being there. And even the process of negotiating the possibility of this being on meant being in conversation with the women who worked at the front desk of this cultural center and kind of trying to convince and develop relationship in order for this to be able to be maintained. The last place that it showed was in the Netherlands, and I didn't get to go there to do the install, but from what I know, it remained on constantly, and they had the systems in place to just keep it on. And on some level, like in hindsight, it feels almost like that was exhausting. Like there's a kind of, it's almost like that's too much. Even though it probably was my intention initially that this would remain on, after moving through it in the way that I did, I realized that that's not necessarily the ask, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
And perhaps we can talk about how this work. Maybe we'll talk. I'm going to move to. Oops, let me move. Maybe we could talk about the a small matter of engineering a bit. I know I have two slides in here, but
Sure. Actually, Max, do you mind if we talk about the that one first? Sorry,
this,
Depth
yeah,
of Field.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the slides have changed, so I'm not sure all of what's there. But yeah, so this is a piece. Maybe I'll just. Do you have the other images that get a little closer to the text?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Um, yeah, so I mean, I partly was interested in chatting about this work. Like, this is something that looks very different from the rest of my practice. And I tend to not have bodies present in my work, and certainly not my own. And this is something that, so my daughter was born in 2018, which is when this image would have been taken. And and now so this is something that I've kind of been thinking through and developing, and I feel like I'm still, making it. I'll just read a couple of the pieces of text. As I grow more and more obviously pregnant, I begin to notice that it is, with two sole exceptions, one black and one white man, only women of color, primarily black, who get up to offer their seats to me on the train each day. It seems every week there's a new expose about black women dying in childbirth in the United States and in the state of New York, where I happen to be. I am not from here. I think about going home. So the piece becomes about the fact that I found a black midwife, and it maybe I can just read the last. Is there one more slide there?
Mm-hmm.
Thank
Yes. Okay. There we go.
you. So part 6, my body won't stop bleeding after she's born. I lose enough blood to fill a body. Sabine is there. The room fills with women. They look like the women who offered me their seats. I want to close my eyes, but there is always one of them holding my gaze. My pulse disappears and then returns as the women replace the blood through my wrists and ankles. They stem the flow. For 3 days, more women come and go from the room. They save me. I awake and meet my daughter. We go home. Um, yeah, so for me, this is something, I mean, in this moment, I'm kind of reflecting on this in this context of thinking about systems and thinking about, I guess, fragile bodies in relationship to systems, and my own fragile, kind of broken body in relationship to a broken system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that we're going from the earth and all its inhabitants to something that's like very much like very personal, like very, and but also this experience that's incredibly relatable, because you're talking about care, and you're also talking about care work. You're talking about it from an effective point of view and an affected point of view. One of the things that I had a question about when I was looking at this work was your decision, one, to create these chapters. I'm curious to know about that. And then also, while changing the chapters, to repeat the image. What does that repetition mean to you? And it's something that comes up in your work a lot, like in your photographic presentations. There's a repetition of a singular or similar image.
Yeah, absolutely. I do notice that I come back to that all the time. And I think for me, there's something in the rhythm that asks for. Um, and also in terms of an ask, I think often I'm kind of looking at something, and I think this will come up in some of the later projects, but something that's not particularly notable, something that it's easy to disregard, and thinking about what it does to shift frame and kind of force focus,
Mhm.
in order to in some way force one to look at something with a different kind of contemplation, with possibly reverence, something that they wouldn't otherwise pay attention to. And I think the repetition is part of that, like a part of an ask to look more closely at something.
Mhm.
And here, certainly with the shifting text, and I this is an image like both my partner and my mom took basically exactly the same image of me. And for some reason, it just, it was something that felt significant, this particular image. But it's often not. It's just the kind of zoning in on something very specific and wanting to stay with it. Yeah, yeah.
Can you talk about, we don't have images of it, but can you talk a little bit about your past exhibition experience working within the realm of conversation and dialogue surrounding care and motherhood? Like I've read some things about your relationship to the Simone Lee exhibition at the New Museum, but and then there was also a project at Project Row. Could you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that'll also come up in a later project. But so Simone Lee in 2016 opened up space through her, I think, a residency at the New Museum, and opened that space up to Black women artists. And eventually, so we began meeting, and eventually that group became a collective called Black Women Artists for Black Lives Matter. Um, and and yeah, that was a really it was a really foundational experience for me, in part because it kind of so I prior to having this kind of art practice, as I mentioned, I was an industrial designer. I made art and I engaged in this way, but it was always, for the most part, in this collaborative community based way. And so it was kind of primarily in contribution to other people's projects. And I kind of shifted course. I decided to go back to school, do my MFA. I did that in Philly, and it was while I was there that I connected with this group, Black Women Artists for Black Lives Matter, and it felt really important for me. It was a kind of returning to the way in which I work, and like being rooted in collective structures and in structures of care. So yeah, so that was really impactful, and that there's another project that we'll talk about, but that is where, well, I'll talk about that when we get there. Um, Sorry, I'm losing track of the question. Am I answering your question at all?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the point for me is that I'm hopeful that our audience can learn from your experience and your specifically your collaborations and your exhibition making, because I know that we have a bunch of curators and artists on, and so I thought that might be helpful to hear about that evolution. But yeah, perhaps we can move on to some of these images. And I know that there's parts of this that we were not going to focus on too much, but
Yeah,
you know.
for sure. Well, I'll say,
Okay, I'll stop video there, and I'll talk about this installation for the remainder of the lecture. So Anna and Andre is an installation that I wrote about in a book chapter, and like a lot of Springer's work, I wanted to examine the political themes of this work, which are often nuanced and subtle. And so the installation, Anna and Andre, is named after Anna Mendieta and Carl Andre. So the installation's name makes reference to Cuban American artist Ana Mendieta, who died tragically under mysterious circumstances, and her partner Carl Andre, a famed minimalist artist who was accused of murdering Mendieta. Springer uses photos of strands of her hair, blowing up these images of infinitesimal aspects of human embodiment to the point that they appear on the gallery wall as dark, unidentifiable lines on a large, white canvas. The strands of the artist's fallen hair took on personal significance. Springer describes the artistic process that went into making this installation as an organic one that began when she noticed the imprints that strands of her hair made on the bathroom counter. So, the previous lecture, we discussed the Me Too movement, and we discussed the ways that social movements have really politicized sexual harassment and the killing of women using the internet. And this case of Anna Mendieta is another example of femicide. And Carl Andre was accused of murdering his wife and throwing her out of a very tall building, and he was acquitted on all charges. But there are many feminist artists who argue that domestic violence contributed to Ana Mendieta's death. So the use of minimalism is expressive of Springer's artistic skills of often saying many things with very small or very minimal aesthetics. Author Pamela Edwards reviews Springer's installation, and it appeared publicly in Toronto as part of an exhibition which reimagined portraiture and displayed the work of several prominent Black artists. Pamela Edwards writes, "Dark wisps of the artist's fallen strands of hair lie magnified against a boundless white background, their meandering lines rendering the body as an elusive trace." The author further comments on the overarching political significance of the work. Named for famed American minimalist sculptor Carl Andre and his wife, Cuban-born feminist body artist Ana Mendieta, who died tragically under mysterious circumstances, these evocative works also function as haunting anti-portraits of the artist couple and Cara herself, probing the tensions between realism and abstraction. And I discussed the Me Too movement in the previous lecture. So the Me Too movement also affected the art world throughout the United States of America and globally. And this is one example. In May 2015, before the Me Too movement took off, Emma Selkowitz, an art student at Columbia University, protested her own sexual assault and the university's inaction by carrying a mattress around campus until her rapist was expelled. In mattress performance, Carry That Weight, Selkowitz carried her mattress in a form of protest, making an artistic statement while also demanding the administration's attention. So, a lot of the artistic work that looks at cases, or a lot of artistic work that looks at cases of sexual violence, harassment, rape, um, femicide, touches on the concept of moral injury. And there are other really famous examples, especially British examples. Tracy Emin's Bed, which I'll show you when we meet synchronously, um, is this death bed, which documents the artist's breakdown. And a lot of Emin's sculpture also comment on rape and sexual violence. So, moral injury is the damage done to one's conscience or moral compass when that person perpetrates, witnesses, or fails to prevent acts that transgress one's own moral beliefs, values, or ethical codes of conduct. So, racial discrimination, gender based discrimination, violence could all be thought of in relation to moral injury. And as I mentioned, the liberal arts and humanities begins after the Holocaust, and some of the most famous scholars Karl Marx, Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, um, write about humanity after the Holocaust. And they write about capitalism and the limitless desire for self promotion and economic growth, irrespective of humanity after the Holocaust. We'll discuss the installation more when we meet, along with Emmons' installation, My Bed. Um, the naming of the installation, Anna and Andre, is also interesting because it is his last name and her first name. In naming this work, Anna and Andre, Springer gestures to the violence the body carries and to the gendered body as an archive that cannot be fully spoken. The authorial masculinist power of the white male artist is expressed, while the use of Mendieta's first name personalizes her. This personalization is also reflective of the embodied connection that Springer and Mendieta share. As artists whose work touches on race and gender, and whose embodiment is not separate from their craft. Andre, as a famed white male artist, is invoked as a public figure of authorial professional artistic power through his last name. This act of naming becomes a subtle critique of how white men are often named in ways that allow them to be respected outside of their personality or personal lives or bodies, and allow them to enter into history beyond all of the other last names that came before them. The last name is also, I think, about property ownership. So, white male property ownership forms the basis of a lot of claims against Indigenous peoples and in celebration of colonization and slavery in the Americas. So the last name is the name of a property owner. And the first name of the woman could perhaps be counted as property. So I think the artistic installation is interesting because it really is about the body um, and also about the disappearance of the body. So minimalism as an artistic canon often attempted to move away from embodiment. So rather than portraiture, which as a genre normally features a kind of image which is supposed to reflect the realism of the body, the use of these lines on the canvas as portraiture is a kind of disidentification with portraiture. And what's interesting to think about is the relationship between embodiment and artistry. So, when do we want to be known as our names or as our ancestry, and when do we not? The use of the term white or white men or white women is sometimes seen to be offensive to those who would like to just be seen as people or as artists, and yet is precisely in this capacity to evade history and all of the power that one has been afforded historically because of histories of colonialism, slavery, the Holocaust, that this kind of disappearance of the body is a conjuring trick that works very well for privileged people. This kind of privileging, refusing to name Carl Andre as a white man and the Mendieta as a dead Afro-Cuban woman is something that we see every day in the criminal justice system. Cindy Gladue was found in an Edmonton motel room, and she bled to death after Bradley Barton inserted a knife into her vagina. In the court of law in Canada, Cindy Gladue was referred to as, quote, a native prostitute or a native woman, a native girl, over 50 times. Bradley Barton was not referred to as a white man. Initially, Bradley Barton was acquitted, and the case had to go to the Supreme Court of Canada until finally Bradley Barton was found guilty. So, this refusal to name people who are in positions of power and the refusal to name whiteness and masculinity is obviously a way of committing crime. We've discussed necropolitics throughout the class as well. And necropolitics is a concept from Achille Mbembe. Necropolitics is a socio-political theory of the use of social and political power to dictate how some people may live and how some must die. The deployment of necropolitics creates what Achille Mbembe calls death worlds, or a new and unique forms of social existence in which populations are subjected to living conditions that confer upon them the status of the living dead. So, the status of the living dead is only possible when some live large and in charge, like white men, and white men who are often allowed to kill others with impunity, and white women who are often allowed to enjoy a whole set of privileges that are only afforded to them because they are white women and cannot be called white men and white women. Achille Mbembe identifies uh, he identifies racism, as the prime driver of necropolitics, stating that racialized people's lives are systematically cheapened and habituated to loss. So, this refusal to name certain people as being privileged corresponds with these cases, like the case of Bradley Barton, who was not a white man. He was just someone who was allowed to kill someone else who was referred to in a court of law as, quote, a native girl or a native prostitute over 50 times. So, this idea of who is visible and who is invisible, whose identity can be named and marketed, as opposed to whose identity is named and marketed only when it is not an identity, it is objectivity or the truth or the best, is really what North America often leaves us with. Visibility politics are compatible, writes Peggy Phelan, with capitalism's relentless appetite for new markets and with the most self satisfying ideologies of the United States. You are welcome here as long as you are productive. The production and reproduction of visibility are part of the labor of the reproduction of capitalism. So, how does the labor of being, say, a white man who can kill with impunity work? I would argue it works in silence, secrecy, and invisibility. And the labor of kind of producing race and gender and sexuality, skin color, ability as kind of saleable minority identities corresponds with this invisibility of the white man and the white woman who are often allowed to kill with impunity, just like kings and queens who can behead others, as described in Agamemnon's understanding of sovereignty and sovereign power. So that is the second part of the lecture, and I will record the other parts and send them to you, and we will also meet synchronous. Thank you. Bye bye.